The untouchable Empress. The HFY dominion stretched across the stars, ruling over 100 worlds. Their empress, Velkara, was feared more than death itself. She was not just a ruler. She was a force of nature. No one dared to speak against her. No one dared to question her. Those who did were never seen again. Inside her massive throne room, Velkara sat on her high seat, her piercing golden eyes scanning the gathered crowd. Today was important. A new species had arrived in the Dominion. Humans. They were small, weak creatures from a distant planet called Earth. Velkara expected them to bow like all others before her. The hall was filled with high-ranking officials, warlords, and diplomats from many species. They watched in silence as the human envoy walked forward. He was alone. No guards, no weapons, just one man standing before the might of the Empire. His name was Captain Daniel Hayes. He stepped onto the black stone floor, stopping at the base of the grand staircase leading up to the throne. The room was cold, filled with a strange energy. Velkara leaned forward, her long silver cloak flowing like liquid metal. "You are the representative of your people?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of 1,000 battles. Daniel nodded. "I am." "You understand the rules," she continued. "All who enter my court must kneel before me. It is a sign of respect." There was silence. The air grew thick. Every pair of eyes in the hall turned toward the human. Daniel did not move. Velkara's expression did not change, but something in the room shifted. A slow murmur spread among the gathered nobles. No one had ever refused before. No one. "I will not kneel," Daniel said firmly. Gasps filled the chamber. Some warlords took a step back, as if afraid to be too close when the Empress unleashed her fury. Velkara's fingers tightened on the armrests of her throne. For a moment, the entire room felt frozen in time. "You will not," she repeated, her voice dangerously soft. Daniel met her gaze without flinching. Respect is earned, not demanded. The hall erupted in whispers. Some laughed at the human's foolishness. Others looked at him with curiosity. Velkara's elite guards, massive, armored warriors, reached for their weapons. Velkara raised a hand, and the guards stopped instantly. "Tell me, Captain Hayes," she said, her golden eyes studying him like a predator. "Do you believe you are above my rule?" "No," Daniel replied. "But I believe no ruler is above their people." A strange silence followed. The Empress stared at him for a long time. Then, slowly, she stood up. Her presence alone made the air feel heavy. The room seemed smaller with her standing, her black and gold armor gleaming under the lights. "In my empire," she said, stepping down the stairs, "defiance has a cost." Daniel did not move as she came closer. The air between them crackled with tension. The warlords, the diplomats, the guards, everyone was waiting for the moment she would strike him down. Velkara stopped just a step away. She was taller, stronger, and radiated an almost godlike power. Her voice dropped to a whisper, only for him to hear. "Do you want to die today, human?" Daniel held her gaze. "Not today." For the first time in years, Velkara felt something unexpected. Amusement. She exhaled, then turned away. "Guards," she commanded. "Take him to the pits." The crowd gasped again. Some grinned in cruel delight. Others looked shocked. The pits. A place where warriors fought for survival. A place where death was certain. 2 guards grabbed Daniel's arms, but he did not resist. He only glanced once more at the Empress as they dragged him away. Velkara returned to her throne, watching as the human disappeared through the grand doors. No one had ever dared to defy her. Until now. And for the first time, in a long, long time, she was curious. A death sentence. The cold, metal doors slammed shut behind Daniel Hayes. The moment they did, the guards released him, stepping back as if he were already dead. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. The walls around him were dark, smooth stone, lined with glowing red veins, pulsing like the lifeblood of the HFY Dominion. The air smelled of metal, sweat, and something else, something old and rotten. The pits, a place where warriors fought for survival, a place where honor meant nothing and death was the only certainty. Daniel had heard stories of the Dominion's infamous gladiator pits. No one sent there ever returned. It was a slow execution, disguised as a test of strength, a punishment for those who displeased the Empress. And now he was the latest fool to be thrown in. The guards sneered at him before stepping away, their heavy boots echoing as they disappeared down a long corridor. A metal gate clanked shut behind them, leaving him alone. A voice rang out from above. "So, you're the human who refused to kneel." Daniel looked up. Shadows moved along a balcony. A group of warriors stood there, their eyes glowing in the dim light. One stepped forward, a massive four-armed alien with pale blue skin and jagged scars across his chest. "I am Gorvok," the creature rumbled, "champion of the pits." Daniel rolled his shoulders. "I take it that's supposed to impress me." The warriors above laughed, a deep guttural sound. Gorvok grinned, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "You are bold," he said. "I will enjoy breaking you." A loud metallic crake echoed through the chamber as the far side of the room opened. A tunnel. Beyond it, Daniel could hear distant roars, cheers, and something heavy moving. The ground beneath him vibrated slightly. A fight was already happening. A new voice interrupted. "You will enter the arena at first light." Daniel turned to see another figure step out of the shadows. She was tall, with violet-hued skin and piercing white eyes. Unlike the warriors above, she wore no armor, just a flowing black robe. She moved with the calmness of someone who had seen countless men die. "The Empress has decided your fate," she continued. "You will fight. If you survive, you will fight again. And again." Daniel smirked. "And if I refuse?" The woman tilted her head slightly. "Then we throw you to the beasts without a weapon." Daniel exhaled slowly. He had expected no less. "Get some rest, human," Gorvok said from above. "You'll need it." The balcony emptied, the warriors disappearing into the darkness. Daniel was left alone once more. He moved toward the stone bench against the wall and sat down. His body ached from the long day, but his mind was sharp. He wasn't dead yet, and that meant he had a chance. A chance to survive. A chance to turn this whole damn thing around. The night passed slowly. In the distance, he could hear screams, the clash of metal, and the deep, guttural roars of creatures too large to be natural. The pits never slept. Neither did he. The arena. The next morning. The twin suns of HFY Prime burned bright overhead. The arena was a massive, circular coliseum, surrounded by towering walls covered in banners of conquered worlds. The stands were filled with thousands of alien spectators, warlords, nobles, and soldiers, all eager to watch the bloodshed. Daniel stood at the center of the arena, the heat pressing down on him. He had been given no armor, no shield, just a simple, curved blade made of dark metal. Across from him, a massive gate groaned open. The crowd roared in anticipation. And then it stepped out, a creature unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. It was at least 10 feet tall, its thick, armored hide rippling with muscle. 4 massive arms, each ending in curved black claws, eyes that burned with hunger. The crowd chanted its name. "Torvash! Torvash!" Daniel exhaled. He tightened his grip on the sword. No armor, no backup, no way out. Just him and the monster. The drumbeats of the arena pounded. Then, Torvash charged. The ground shook as the creature roared, closing the distance in seconds. Daniel didn't wait. He didn't hesitate. He moved. At the last moment, he sidestepped, ducking low as one massive claw swiped past his head. The wind from it alone sent dust flying. Torvash spun fast, faster than something its size should be able to move. Another strike came. Daniel barely twisted away, the claws slicing the air where he had just stood. The crowd roared in approval. Daniel kept moving. He had no chance in a direct fight. He had to be smarter, faster. He noticed something. The way the creature moved, the way it shifted its weight. It was strong, but predictable. Every attack had a pattern. Torvash lunged again. This time, Daniel was ready. He dropped low, rolling beneath its swing. As he came up, he slashed his sword across its leg. The blade barely cut through its thick hide, but it was enough. The beast snarled in pain, stumbling for just a second. A second was all Daniel needed. He moved fast, striking again, this time at its side, where the armor was weaker. A deep gash appeared, dark green blood spilling onto the sand. The crowd gasped. Torvash roared in fury. Daniel grinned. Maybe he wasn't supposed to win this fight, but he sure as hell wasn't going to lose it. The human problem. The arena smelled of blood and sweat. The roars of the crowd still echoed in Daniel's ears as he stood over the massive corpse of Torvash. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. His body ached, his muscles burned, but he was still standing. He had done the impossible. He had killed the beast. And now, the entire HFY Dominion had a problem. A new threat to the Empire. From her throne high above, Empress Velkera watched in silence. Her golden eyes narrowed as she studied the human below. She had expected him to die, torn apart within minutes. That was how this was supposed to go. Yet there he was, standing in the blood-stained sand, gripping a sword that should have been useless against Torvash's armored hide. She leaned forward slightly. This was interesting. Beside her, General Vakros, a towering warlord clad in heavy obsidian armor, shifted uneasily. "This is a problem," he muttered. "If the people see a human besting our warriors, they will question our rule." Velkera remained quiet. Her empire thrived on strength. The weak obeyed the strong. That was the law. And now, this human, this fragile creature, had defied that law simply by surviving. For the first time in decades, she felt something unusual. Curiosity. Slowly, she rose from her throne, silencing the arena with a single movement of her hand. The crowd, eager for blood moments ago, fell into an eerie hush. Daniel, still gripping his sword, glanced up. Their eyes met across the battlefield. The Empress spoke. Her voice rang through the massive arena, smooth yet sharp like a blade. "You have proven yourself stronger than I expected." Daniel wiped sweat from his brow, but said nothing. He was still catching his breath. "But strength alone does not make one worthy," she continued. "You live only because I allow it. You are still nothing more than an insect beneath my boot." Daniel smirked. "Funny," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "Last I checked, you're the one still sitting up there while I stand down here." The silence in the arena deepened. The crowd held its breath. The warlord standing near Velkera stiffened, expecting an immediate order to strike him down. But the Empress did not move. She stared at him for a long moment before a cold smile crossed her lips. "Very well, human," she said. "If you wish to stand, then stand." She turned to her warlords. "Bring him to the crucible." A ripple of shock passed through the gathered nobles. Daniel frowned. "The what now?" "The crucible," General Vakros explained with a smirk. "A place where warriors are forged. If you truly believe you are strong, then you will face the trials." Velkera's golden eyes glowed. "Survive, and perhaps I will grant you an audience." Daniel sighed, rolling his shoulders. "Yeah, why not? I've already come this far." Velkera smirked. She liked this human spirit, but spirit alone would not save him. The crucible, a gauntlet of death. The crucible was not a place. It was an experience, a test designed to break warriors down to nothing, to expose their weakness, their limits. And it had only ever had one survivor. Daniel was dragged through dark tunnels, the metallic scent of blood thick in the air. The guards did not speak as they brought him to a vast underground chamber. Massive stone pillars stretched into the darkness above. Strange, glowing glyphs marked the walls, humming with an ancient power. The heat was suffocating, as if the air itself was angry. A figure stepped forward from the shadows. Gorvok, the champion of the pits, the same four-armed warrior who had mocked him the night before. The alien cracked his knuckles, his muscles flexing under his battle-scarred skin. He towered over Daniel, his sharp teeth bared in a hungry grin. "This is where you break, human," Gorvok growled. Daniel smirked. "People keep saying that." A deep gong rang through the chamber. The trial had begun. Gorvok lunged, his four fists striking like a storm. Daniel barely dodged the first blow, twisting away as stone shattered where he had just been standing. The second strike clipped his shoulder, sending him stumbling back. Pain flared through his arm, but he gritted his teeth. No time for pain. He had to survive. He ducked under the next swing, rolling across the heated stone. Sweat dripped down his face. His body was already exhausted from the fight in the arena, but he couldn't afford to slow down. Gorvok pressed the attack, swinging relentlessly. Daniel was faster, but the warrior was stronger. Then he saw it. A weakness. Gorvok favored his right side. His strikes were powerful, but predictable. Daniel waited. He needed one perfect moment. Gorvok lunged again. Daniel stepped forward instead of back. He slid under the warrior's arm, twisting around, and drove his elbow into the alien's ribs. A grunt of pain. Daniel grinned. So he could hurt him. He kept moving, attacking low where the champion's thick hide was weaker. Gorvok roared in frustration, swinging wildly. Daniel ducked, dodged, countered. Then, an opening. With a final burst of speed, Daniel grabbed the warrior's arm and twisted, using Gorvok's own momentum against him. The alien lost his balance. Daniel struck. A sharp kick to the back of the knee, a hard elbow to the jaw. Gorvok stumbled, and for the first time, fell. The chamber fell silent. Daniel stood over the champion, panting. Then he turned his head toward the shadowy balcony above, where Velkara and her warlords watched. He wiped the blood from his lip and smirked. "Still think I'm weak?" Velkara's golden eyes gleamed. This human was not a problem. He was a challenge. And she loved challenges. The challenge. The silence in the crucible was louder than any battle cry. Daniel stood over the fallen champion, his chest rising and falling with each breath. Sweat dripped down his face, mixing with the dust and blood that clung to his skin. His entire body ached, screaming for rest. But he wasn't dead. More importantly, he had won. Above him, in the shadowed balcony overlooking the arena, Empress Velkara sat motionless. Her golden eyes were unreadable, but the tension in the room was thick. Around her, warlords and noble elites whispered among themselves. A human had bested the undefeated champion of the pits. This wasn't just unexpected. This was impossible. Velkara's dilemma. For the first time in years, Velkara felt something strange, a mixture of irritation, fascination, and something even deeper. Curiosity. No one had ever challenged her authority like this before. No one had ever defied her law and survived. Yet here stood a man, battered but unbroken, looking up at her with a smirk as if he had won something. Velkara's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest of her throne. Her warlords were uneasy. If she let this human go, it would be a sign of weakness. If she executed him now, she would seem afraid. And she was not afraid. No, this human was something else entirely. Something rare. And there was only one way to deal with a rare challenge. She stood, her long black cloak flowing like liquid metal as she moved. The crowd fell into an eerie silence. Every eye was on her. Velkara raised a hand. "Bring him to me." The throne room of the Empress. Daniel's hands were bound, though it was more for show than necessity. 2 heavily armored guards flanked him as they marched him through the massive corridors of the imperial palace. The architecture was dark and imposing, with intricate alien carvings glowing faintly along the walls. At last, the doors to the throne room opened. The air inside was cold, despite the heat of the twin suns outside. Velkera sat on an obsidian throne, her golden eyes burning like fire. Around her, high-ranking officials and warlords stood in silence. Daniel was shoved forward, but he didn't stumble. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Velkera tilted her head slightly. "You continue to surprise me, human." Daniel gave a tired smirk. "I get that a lot." A murmur passed through the warlords. No one spoke to the Empress so casually. No one. Velkera leaned forward slightly. "You have fought well. You have earned the right to choose your fate." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's new. Most tyrants don't offer options." Some of the warlords tensed. A few guards gripped their weapons. But Velkera, she smiled. A slow, cold smile. "I could have you executed," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I could have you thrown back into the pits to fight until you break. Or—" She stood and stepped down from her throne. The air itself seemed heavier as she moved. "You could challenge my champion in a duel." The crowd reacted instantly. A few gasped. Others whispered in shock. Daniel frowned. "Didn't I just beat your best warrior?" Velkera's eyes gleamed. "No," she said simply. "You beat a champion of the pits, but my true champion has never lost." From the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was not Gorbok. This new warrior was unlike anything Daniel had seen before. 7 feet tall, clad in sleek black armor that pulsed with an unnatural energy. The figure removed its helmet, revealing smooth, silver skin and piercing violet eyes. "This is my personal executioner," Velkera said, watching Daniel carefully. "Face him in battle. If you win, you go free." Daniel's heart pounded. He had barely survived the last fight. This was something else. Still, he grinned. "All right," he said. "Let's dance." The duel begins. The chamber had changed. The floor beneath them shifted, splitting into massive floating platforms suspended over an endless pit of darkness. Energy barriers flickered along the edges, ensuring there was no escape. Daniel rolled his shoulders, stepping onto the nearest platform. Across from him, the executioner did the same. Velkera raised a hand. "Begin." The executioner vanished. Daniel barely had time to react. 1 second, his opponent was standing across from him. The next, he was behind him. A strike came from nowhere, aimed straight for his head. Daniel ducked, spinning away. A blade sliced through the air, missing him by inches. The executioner moved too fast. Daniel had fought aliens before. Strong ones, tough ones, but this was something different. He needed a strategy. He dodged another strike, barely managing to stay on the platform. His opponent was relentless, each attack faster than the last. Then he noticed something. Each time the executioner vanished, there was a faint flicker in the air, of distortion, like heat rising from metal. A pattern. Daniel grinned. "Gotcha." The executioner lunged again, disappearing into the shadows. Only this time, Daniel moved first. He leaped to the side, spinning in midair. His opponent reappeared exactly where he had been standing, just as Daniel's foot connected with his jaw. The impact sent the executioner stumbling. The crowd gasped. Daniel landed on the platform, breathing hard. His opponent steadied himself, wiping a thin trail of silver blood from his lip. For the first time, the executioner smiled. "You are not like the others," he said. Daniel smirked. "You have no idea." Velkera watched from above, leaning forward slightly. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes. Excitement. This fight wasn't over. Not even close. The impossible victory. The executioner wiped the silver blood from his lip, his violet eyes gleaming with newfound respect. Across the floating platforms of the crucible, Daniel Hayes stood, muscles tensed, his breath steady despite the exhaustion creeping into his limbs. He had landed a hit, a clean hit, and judging by the smirk on his opponent's face, that didn't happen often. Above them, from the throne room's grand balcony, Empress Velkera watched in silence. She leaned slightly forward, golden eyes locked onto the battle unfolding before her. This was no longer a simple duel. This was a spectacle. Daniel had already done the impossible. But winning, that was something else entirely. The second round begins. The executioner cracked his neck, flexing his fingers. The air between them shimmered as the gravity-shifting platforms began moving unpredictably, some rising, others falling, some spinning in place. This wasn't just a test of strength anymore. It was a battle of strategy. Daniel's eyes flicked between the moving platforms, calculating. The executioner was faster, stronger, more skilled. But he had something else. Instinct. Daniel didn't wait. He moved. Leaping onto a rising platform, he dodged just as the executioner's blade sliced through the air where he had been standing. The speed of the attack was terrifying. Had he been even a fraction slower, his head would have been gone. The executioner vanished again. Daniel anticipated it this time. He ducked just before the attack came from behind, rolling to the side. But the executioner was already adjusting. This time, he didn't miss. A sharp kick struck Daniel in the ribs, sending him flying across the arena. His body slammed onto another floating platform, pain exploding through his chest. He coughed, spitting blood onto the stone. The crowd roared. Velkera's warlords exchanged glances. The human had lasted longer than expected, but the outcome was inevitable. Or so they thought. Daniel pushed himself up, wincing. His ribs were definitely bruised, maybe even broken, but pain meant he was still alive. And as long as he was alive, he could fight. The weakness. The executioner didn't attack immediately. He tilted his head slightly, observing Daniel like a predator studying prey that refused to fall. "You're different," the warrior said, voice deep and steady. "You don't fear death." Daniel wiped the blood from his lips, smirking. "I've been too busy surviving to be afraid." The executioner grinned. "Good." He vanished again. Daniel knew it was coming. But this time, he did something unexpected. Instead of dodging, he lunged forward. The executioner reappeared in front of him, and Daniel was already moving. Using the momentum of the gravity shifts, he twisted midair, grabbing his opponent's wrist. The executioner's eyes widened. For the first time, he was caught. Daniel pulled, using the assassin's own speed against him. The executioner stumbled forward onto the unstable platform, his balance thrown off. Daniel took his chance. With everything he had left, he drove his knee into the executioner's stomach, a grunt of pain, a flicker of surprise in those violet eyes. But Daniel wasn't done. He twisted, swinging his elbow into the warrior's jaw. The impact sent the executioner staggering backward. His foot hit the edge of the platform. And then, for the first time in his life, he fell. The impossible outcome. The executioner tumbled through the air, barely managing to grab the edge of another platform as he fell. He hung there, breathing hard. The arena was silent. No one spoke. No one cheered. No one could. A human had beaten the Empress's executioner. Daniel stood on the platform, blood dripping from his lip, chest heaving. His body screamed in protest, but he refused to fall. Above, Velkera stared down at him, her expression unreadable. Then, she did something no one expected. She laughed. A slow, amused chuckle at first, but then it grew into something richer, something genuine. The Empress of the HFY Dominion, a woman who had never lost a battle, who had ruled through power and fear, was laughing. She raised a hand, silencing the murmuring warlords around her. Then she spoke. Enough. The guards at the edges of the arena snapped to attention. The floating platforms ceased their movement. The executioner pulled himself up, stepping back onto stable ground, but he did not attack. Instead, he looked at Daniel with something close to respect. Velkera descended from the throne balcony, her cloak billowing behind her as she stepped onto the battlefield. For the first time, she was face to face with Daniel. She was taller than him, stronger than him, and yet, she had never met anyone quite like him. "You continue to defy expectations, human," she said, studying him closely. "You are reckless, undisciplined. You fight with instinct, not precision." Daniel smirked, still trying to catch his breath. "And yet, here I am." Velkera's golden eyes gleamed. "Yes," she admitted. "Here you are." She turned to her warlords. "Release him." Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd, but no one dared to speak against her. The chains around Daniel's wrists were removed. Velkera looked at him once more. "You have earned something rare today," she said. "My respect." Daniel blinked. He had expected a lot of things. Death, torture, more fights. But this. "Now," Velkera continued, stepping closer, her voice dropping into something almost dangerous. "Tell me, Captain Hayes, what will you do with it?" Daniel grinned. "Guess we'll find out." Velkera smirked. Yes, they would. The final duel. The great halls of the HFY Dominion had seen countless battles, betrayals, and victories, but never had they witnessed anything like this. A human, battered and bruised, standing unchained in the heart of the Empress's throne room. A warrior who had bested her champion, defied her authority, and still stood with that infuriating grin on his face. Velkera had offered him freedom. And yet, Daniel Hayes had done something unthinkable. He had challenged her. The Emperor's blade. The room fell into a tense silence as Velkera's warlords and advisors exchanged glances, unable to process what they had just heard. No one, in the history of the HFY Dominion, had ever uttered such words. Daniel could see it in their eyes. They expected her to kill him where he stood. But she didn't. Instead, Velkera smiled. Not the cruel smirk of a tyrant, nor the cold calculation of a ruler. No, this smile was something else entirely. Genuine amusement. She stepped forward, her black and gold cloak flowing behind her, the very air around her charged with an unspoken challenge. "You are either the bravest or the most foolish being I have ever met, Captain Hayes," she said, her voice smooth as polished steel. Daniel wiped the blood from his lip and chuckled. "Why not both?" Velkera's golden eyes gleamed. "Very well, human." She extended her hand, and a weapon was brought forth, the Emperor's blade. A long curved sword forged from a metal that pulsed with energy, its dark surface etched with golden inscriptions of fallen rulers. A weapon that had seen the deaths of kings, warlords, and conquerors. Daniel looked at it, then back at her. "Bit dramatic, don't you think?" Velkera smirked. "Dramatic? No. Historical? Yes." She took the sword and, with a single motion, ignited the energy filament running along its edge. A deep hum filled the chamber as the blade came to life. "Come, human," she said, pointing the tip of the sword toward him. "Let us see if you are worthy of this moment." A battle between titans. The warlords and guards formed a circle around them, giving space for the battle to unfold. No shields, no tricks, just two warriors standing face to face. Daniel took a deep breath. His body ached, his muscles protested, but his mind was clear. He had fought monsters. He had survived impossible odds. But this was different. This wasn't about survival. This was about proving something. Velkera lunged first. Her speed was terrifying. Daniel barely twisted out of the way, feeling the heat of the energy blade slice through the air, just inches from his chest. He rolled across the floor, coming up in time to block her second strike with the sword he had been given. The impact nearly sent him crashing to the ground. She was stronger than anyone he had ever fought. Stronger than her champion. Stronger than Torvash. Stronger than anything that made sense. He didn't have time to think. He moved. Velkera was relentless, her attacks fluid and precise, her blade striking from angles he barely saw coming. Daniel fought defensively, dodging, blocking, rolling, but it wasn't enough. A strike slipped through his guard, searing pain as her blade slashed across his side. He gritted his teeth, no time to feel it. Velkera pressed forward. Another attack. Another dodge. Daniel countered, swinging his sword low, forcing her to leap back. For a brief second, their eyes met. She wasn't holding back, but she also wasn't trying to kill him. She was testing him. Daniel smirked. "Not bad," he said, wincing as blood trickled down his side. "For an empress." Velkera tilted her head. "You talk too much." She lunged again. But this time, so did he. Their blades met in a violent clash, sparks flying as they moved faster, pushing each other across the throne room. Daniel didn't fight like a swordsman. He fought like a survivor. Dirty, unpredictable, human. And that made him dangerous. Breaking the unbreakable. The battle rage. Velkera struck high. Daniel ducked and swept her legs. She rolled, coming up with a vicious counter. Daniel twisted, barely avoiding decapitation. She struck again. This time, he was ready. Instead of blocking, he sidestepped, using her momentum against her. For the first time in her life, Velkera stumbled. Gasps filled the chamber. Warlords leaned forward, stunned. No one had ever forced her to make a mistake in combat. Daniel saw the moment of hesitation in her eyes, the flicker of realization. He had surprised her, and that was his opening. He pressed forward, pushing her back with a flurry of unpredictable strikes. Not precise, not clean, but effective. Velkera's golden eyes blazed. She wasn't angry. She was excited. Then, in a blur of motion, she disarmed him. A twist, a strike. His sword clattered across the floor. Daniel barely had time to react before she lunged, pinning him down, the tip of the Emperor's blade pressed against his throat. Silence. The Warlord stood frozen. The entire room felt like it was holding its breath. Velkera stared down at him, her breathing steady but heavy. The blade didn't press deeper. Then, slowly, she pulled it back. She stood, extending a hand. Daniel blinked. Then, he laughed. Loud. Real. Unafraid. "Guess I lost," he said, reaching for her hand. She pulled him up. Their eyes locked. And for the first time, there was no hostility. No battle. Just understanding. "You did not lose," Velkera said, her voice quieter now. "You are still standing. That is enough." Daniel smirked. "So, does this mean I get a medal?" Velkera chuckled. Oh yes, this human was trouble. And she liked it. The unthinkable outcome. The throne room of the HFY Dominion had never known such silence. The battle was over. The swords were still, and yet something greater had just begun. Daniel Hayes, a lone human among giants, had survived. Not just against beasts, not just against warriors, but against the Empress herself. And he was still standing. A galaxy watching. From the towering cities of conquered worlds to the deepest warships in the Dominion's fleet, the news spread like wildfire. The human did not kneel. The human did not die. The human fought the Empress and lived. For some, it was an insult, a stain on the Empress's legacy, a sign that the Dominion was no longer invincible. For others, it was a sign of something far more dangerous. Hope, face to face with power. Daniel breathed heavily, rolling his sore shoulders. His body ached. His ribs throbbed. His hands were still tingling from gripping his sword too tightly. But he was smiling. Across from him, Empress Velkera studied him with those unreadable golden eyes. Her dark armor gleamed under the throne room's grand lights, her expression calm. Then, to everyone's shock, she laughed. Soft at first, then deeper. Real. Daniel arched an eyebrow. Didn't think I was that funny. Velkera shook her head. You continue to surprise me, Captain Hayes. Daniel smirked. I get that a lot. Around them, the warlords and elite guards stood stunned. They had expected this to end with blood. A declaration. A public execution. But their empress did something unthinkable. She turned to them, her voice carrying across the chamber. This human, she said, is not weak. A ripple of shock went through the room. Some warlords looked at each other, uncertain. Others clenched their jaws in frustration. Daniel crossed his arms. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Velkera stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Too close. He could see the sharp angles of her face, the faintest smirk on her lips. Her golden eyes flickered with something dangerous. I have a decision to make, Captain Hayes, she said smoothly. One that will shape the future of this empire. Daniel tilted his head. And what's that? Velkera smirked. She turned back to her people. This human, she announced, is not my enemy. Gasps. A few warlords visibly tensed, their hands twitching toward their weapons. But none dared to act. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Not what he expected. And what does that mean, exactly? He asked. Velkera glanced back at him. It means, Captain Hayes, that I have a proposition. The offer that changed everything. Velkera ascended her throne once more, resting one elbow on the armrest as she studied him. You could have left, she said. You could have taken your freedom, escaped my grasp, and never looked back. Daniel shrugged. Yeah, but where's the fun in that? She chuckled. No, you wanted something more. A challenge. A purpose. Daniel rolled his shoulders. And she leaned forward. Join me. The words sent shockwaves through the room. A few warlords outright growled. One stepped forward, his deep crimson skin darkening in fury. Your Majesty, this is unacceptable. This human has. Velkera raised a single hand. The warlord stopped immediately. Silence. Her golden eyes never left Daniel. You have proven yourself, she continued. You have done what no other being has ever dared. And now, I offer you something no human has ever been given. She stood, her presence immense, the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds behind her. Stand by my side, Captain Hayes. Fight not against me, but with me. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his messy hair. That's one hell of an offer. Velkera smirked. It is. He glanced around the room. The stares of warriors, warlords, and assassins pierced through him like knives. He could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't just a decision. It was a turning point. For him. For the Dominion. For the entire galaxy. He scratched his chin. You know, he said, looking back at her, I was never really one for authority. Velkera raised an eyebrow. No? He grinned. But I do like shaking things up. He extended his hand. Velkera's golden eyes gleamed. Slowly, she took it. The room erupted. Some in outrage, others in shock. A human, once a prisoner, now allied with the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. Unthinkable. Impossible. And yet, it was happening. Velkera's smirk widened. She had conquered empires, burned planets, crushed rebellions. But this was something new, and she loved it. Daniel leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough for only her to hear. So, does this mean I get a fancy title now? Velkera chuckled. Oh, Captain Hayes, she said, you have no idea what you've just gotten yourself into. Daniel grinned. Good.